CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now for more on all of this. Ed, let's start with the shutdown.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just about to get really ugly at the airports. We've got a 3-week reprieve now. Is there any evidence that a compromise can actually be reached on border security in that time?
Well, look, the hostages have been released, but
Yes.
the standoff continues for 3 more weeks.
Yeah.
And I think, the thought that they are somehow going to, in 3 weeks, settle something that's roiled Washington this entire century, I think it would be pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And so we may very well be back at this point in 3 weeks, or they may present him with a bunch of options and say, look, we'll spend $5.7 billion. It's just we don't want to spend it on a physical wall from sea to shining sea.
Yeah.
Let's put together a package with drones and with some fencing and with more personnel and an understanding that this ultimately does help fortify the border and allow you to say that you fought for this, and in some places there'll be new physical barriers. We'll see.
The president's still floating this idea of a national emergency.
Right.
How likely is he to make good on that threat?
Well, he says he wants to do that, but remember, he didn't do it. And
right.
we think part of the reason he didn't do it is because look at the numbers. We had a CBS News poll out earlier this month that showed that a majority of Americans didn't like the idea of doing that. And within hours of that poll surfacing, suddenly the talk about a national emergency subsided. So he can threaten that, but the numbers are there, and they would probably still be there in 3 weeks if he decides to do it.
We've seen so many things with President Trump being about ego.
Right.
And I mean, I'm looking at the Daily News back page that says caveman.
Right.
So no matter what happens from here, win or a loss for the president at this point?
Certainly a short-term loss. He blinked. This was a standoff between him and Nancy Pelosi, and he blinked. And that will frustrate him all weekend, so you wonder what is the result of this going into next week. What does he announce? What does he say? What does he tweet? We'll see. But look, he looks at numbers like that. Disapproval, 59%.
Yeah.
It was 57% in the CBS poll. And that's, that's bad for him right now in the short term. But look, for the most part, his base is still with him.
He hasn't lost the base.
Right, and as long as they somewhat hold, he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi has put the State of the Union back on the table. We don't have a scheduled date for it yet, but it seems to be back in the game. Yeah,
she said yesterday didn't entirely rule out Tuesday. The problem is it is a big logistical hurdle to clear because you're bringing all 3 branches of government into the same room. There's security protocol. There's some other arrangements that have to be made. So if it's not this Tuesday, could be the following Tuesday. But don't be surprised if suddenly Democrats turn around and say, why don't we wait until this 3-week period has passed because we don't want to necessarily infect the negotiations.
Interesting that the shutdown news came the same day that the Roger Stone
Friday was a miserable day at the White House.
Yeah.
You take the Roger Stone situation, you take the airport slowdown, which was a result of this, and the fact that the president had to do what he did. Look, Stone's yet another person close to the president, tied up in this, makes it harder for them to continue making the arguments that he has nothing to do with it or knows nothing about it. We'll see where the evidence on this one goes. But it made pretty clear yesterday, the indictment did. Stone was talking to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks may have had contact with the Russians, and there was somebody at Trump Tower that Stone was in contact with on a regular basis. The saga continues.
The president clearly did not want to take questions on that one.
No, not at all.
For the Democrats at this point now, I know they keep saying we're going to wait for the Mueller report, we're going to wait for the Mueller report. What does this do for them in that regard?
Well, they're waiting for the Mueller report, and the sort of unanimity we've seen on that, save for a few members, is pretty remarkable. But remember, the investigations continue. This past week, the Oversight Committee announcing they're going to start looking into questions about who got security clearances. That is the start of all these investigations they promised that looks at all aspects of the administration. And we will continue to see examples of that in the coming weeks, new investigations in the different aspects of the administration. And that's one way that they'll be able to sort of release the valve a little bit on that pressure from Democrats back home to investigate the president.
All right, Eddie. Excuse me, Eddie.
As long as the check clears, Michelle, you can comment wherever you want.
Always eye-opening and fun with you here on the desk.
Family on a Saturday.
There it is. Tomorrow morning on Face the Nation here on CBS, Margaret Brennan's guests will include acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and Senators Susan Collins of Maine and Joe Manchin of West Virginia.